Thanks for joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. We've got a great panel set up for you here to talk about how we move from security awareness to actually changing user behavior. My name is Chris Sinetos. I'm CEO of Covered Security. Our mission is to motivate, empower, and reward people for improving their online security and helping organizations understand where that behavior is weak, target it, and measure behavior change. We brought together a great panel, a great group of professionals with a lot of experience around how we move forward beyond the current state of the market. And we look forward to an exciting discussion. Now, our agenda for today will be on these three areas. First, we're going to look a little bit at research. What does the research say about why people adopt security habits or why they don't? We will spend the bulk of our time, about a half an hour, hopefully, on a panel discussion with our esteemed CISOs who have joined us, who will be introduced when we get to the panel. And at the end, we'll have a very brief, about 5-minute or less demonstration of some actual ways that we can actually move users from awareness to changing their behavior. So that's our agenda for today. We're going to jump right into the research. And to start that off, I'd like to introduce you to Florian Schaub. So Florian is an assistant professor in the School of Information at the University of Michigan. His research focuses on empowering users to effectively manage their privacy in complex socio-technological systems, and his work spans privacy, human-computer interaction, mobile, ubiquitous computing, and the Internet of Things. He's done some really exciting research around why people choose to adopt strong security habits or not. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll pass it on to Florian.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Let me just quickly share my screen. Excuse me, this is not the view we want. We can fix it easily. 1 second. Okay, are you all seeing my slides?
Not yet.
Yes, okay, great. Well, thanks, Chris, for having me today. And I just quickly want to talk a little bit or kind of set the stage for our discussion today, talking about how people adopt or abandon security practices and why they do that. Well, the first thing is that there's actually a lot of security advice out there. There's a great paper by some Google researchers from 2017. They surveyed security experts and they got 152 different simple steps to keep yourself secure online. More recently, Alyssa Redmiles and colleagues surveyed, or they basically analyzed security advice online, and they found 374 different security practices that were recommended to consumers. So there's a lot of security advice out there, but one of the problems is that what experts think is effective security advice and what non-experts think is effective security advice is actually not very well correlated. So this graph from the same Google researchers is kind of ordered by what experts think is most important. And experts say, you really need to update your systems. You need to use unique passwords. You need to use two-factor authentication, and so forth. And those don't rank that highly for the non-experts, particularly updating system and two-factor authentication is not really on their radar. Instead, non-experts use antivirus. They think they want to have strong passwords, but they're not actually using passwords managers to store them, for example. So in our research, we've been looking at how do people actually adopt these recommended practices? And this was work led by my PhD student, Yixin Zhou, together with researchers at NortonLifeLock, who also funded this research. So what we did in our study is we looked at commonly recommended security, privacy, and identity protection practices. I'm not going to go too much into detail on these, but then what we did is we conducted an online survey with 902 participants using the online study platform Prolific. And we showed each participant 10 random practices from this list of 30 practices. And then we asked them, well, do you always do this? Is it something you do, but you not always follow it? Have you done this, but you're not doing it anymore? Or are you maybe expecting to do this soon? Or you haven't done it, but you also don't want to do it? Or you've just never heard of it? And the goal here was really to get a sense of, are people actually adhering to this advice? Are they doing it always or just sometimes? And also understand whether there might be rejection or unawareness. And what we found is that we actually see relatively higher adherence to security practices compared to the privacy practices and identity protection practices. These are just the security practices. And these dark blue bars are basically the people who say, I always do this. What's kind of interesting, though, is that, again, the practices we as experts would say are maybe the most effective, using password managers, using two-factor authentication, updating software, are actually kind of on the lower end here in terms of adoption. If we look at privacy practices, we were actually happily surprised that lots of people are engaging in privacy protective behaviors. But in this category, we also saw the largest percentages of abandonment of practices, particularly when it comes to using VPN or Tor or other anonymization systems, using fake names or identities when creating profiles, and clearing cookies. And ask why this is the case, we find that people said, well, you know, either they didn't need it or they felt they didn't need it, they didn't see the risk anymore, or usability turned out to be a large problem. So we did regression analyses to understand what factors really are predictive of adoption of different practices. And we find that the type of practice makes a big impact. So security practices are actually much more established than privacy or identity protection practices. So people seem to get the importance of security, at least in theory. We also saw that user effort played a large role. The practices for which we saw the highest full adoption were automated practices, or fire and forget, right? Install your antivirus software and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Or manual practices. So people claimed, like, I always check my account and I make sure I check links before I click on them. Whereas, you know, again, I think we would say, well, is that really the case? Where people had the most problem, and we actually saw less adoption, is when they're assisted practices. What we mean by that is something like two-factor authentication, or password managers, or selectively using encryption or private browsing, right? Like, these are things where you actually need to do something, and you either need to remember that you need to do something, or you get nagged by the system, right? Like, oh, you need your second factor to log in. And that's really what creates tensions for users. And then we also see that technical background helps, is kind of indicative of higher levels of adoption, and so are negative experiences. So people who have actually become victims of identity theft across the board report higher practice adoption because they know what it costs them if they get hurt. So, okay, great, right? What does this mean for actually giving security advice? I think one takeaway here is that it's important to emphasize multi-layered protections. People often, and we saw this in this study, but also in our other research, people think they're doing one thing that's relatively easy for them and that keeps them secure, whereas they don't really understand how different practices kind of form a protective layer and together make them safer. What people struggle with, what we see in our work and what the prior studies showed, is that there's a lack of prioritization among what advice is actually the most effective and is the one you should be focusing on and work on first. And I think that's something we can do better when we talk to our users in terms of, well, this is the thing we really need you to do, and here are 5 other things that might be helpful after that. But you need to get to this level first before you should be thinking about anything else. And then, given that people who have actually had negative experiences are very much susceptible to advice, we should think about how we can leverage these at-risk situations. When bad things happen, how can we help people recover from those and get better? And then finally, it's important to really not just think about like, oh, are people adhering to practices, but also what does it take to adhere to a practice? Is it actually usable and easy to do? And is it useful to the people? And with that, I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Fantastic. Thanks, Florian. And what I'd like to do is add a little bit more about the research that we've done here at Covered and share what we found in sort of related areas to what Florian's talking about. And then we'll jump right into the panel. So as I mentioned, our mission here is empowering, motivating, and rewarding people for improving their security habits to make sure that they reduce the risk for every company that they're associated with, in particular, their employer. Far too often, I've heard over the years, the soft underbelly of our security program is our people. And we can't seem to get them to improve their behavior. And we recognize that that behavior goes with us everywhere we are, home, work, and frankly, nowadays, home and work have really sort of melded together. And unfortunately, 70+% of corporate breaches have in the attack chain people's behavior causing part of the issue. So we started off, before we founded the company, doing a lot of research around the area. And we looked at the behavior of security professionals, folks like those of us on this panel and in the participants, and everyone else, what I would call normal people, not security professionals. The first thing we tried to figure out is how are we different? Well, one of the things that we found out was looking across tens of thousands of people is that non-security professionals are actually compromised online at a rate almost 125% higher than folks like us. And when we looked across 200 behaviors and used some machine learning, we found out that this was due to 18 habits that we have in general that typical end users generally don't. Now, you're not going to be surprised these habits are in the areas that we all worry about, the 5 major ways that hackers compromise people. It's around password cracking, phishing, social engineering, credential stuffing, and account takeover. Our 18 behaviors, indicators that someone is a security professional, lie in these 5 areas. So now that we know what people should do, if we believe that, the question is, how do you get them to do that? And Florian talked about a lot of really important things, including things like leverage and relevance. How can we get people to act? We've got to get something that's personally relevant to them, we think. So we went out and did research eventually across 1 million people using Facebook with sort of general security drivers to see if we could get them to take action. We got people to take action at about a 1% rate, which actually is not that much lower than typical security education action rates, if all you do is put education in front of people. We then delivered more personally relevant prompts for action around things like the Equifax breach, or focusing on people in Kansas City around the Kansas utilities hack. And we found that actually, if something was personally relevant to them, you'd get a much higher proactive action rate. When you put it in context, as Florian talked about, right, when someone has had an issue, if you confront someone with a company that they have an account with that's been breached, you will get almost 20% of the people to proactively take action. So putting things in context, our research showed, drives much higher action. We also took a look at gamification and rewards, which are beginning to be big in the industry. And we're all, I think, probably familiar with that great study in Europe. If you give people a candy bar, will they give you their password? Well, looking on the more positive side, right, this is based on cognitive brain science research. A seminal study was around giving juice to monkeys, showing them shapes on a screen. When the right shape came up, if they hit a lever, they'd get their juice. And this is a key value of rewards, that spike of dopamine in our brains. Over time, what they found out was if you repeated it, you didn't have to give them the juice for the dopamine to start coursing through the brain. That actually, we anticipate rewards. So if we can, the theory, of course, is if we can make a common thing for people to get rewarded for doing the right things, they will get that sense of accomplishment and the positive response rate. And of course, this is what drives all sorts of consumer apps to be very, very addictive, both for kids and for us. So we took a look at that as well, and we found that, lo and behold, if you give people immediate response, positive emotional response, you've gotten a point, you get a badge. If you give people even small financial rewards, you can drive behavior even higher. You can drive a proactive action rate upwards of 35, 40% of the time. So those are some of the things that we've learned in our research. Now I'd like to move on to the panel. We have a bunch of questions for them. For those who are in the audience, feel free to use chat to send questions to the host, and we will add those questions to the mix. But let me start off by introducing our 4 panelists, and of course, Florian will also be available for questions and commentary during the panel as well. So let me introduce to you, for those of you who don't know them, Tim Callahan. Tim is the Senior Vice President and Global CISO at Aflac, the world's leading provider of supplemental and voluntary insurance. He's held CISO and other senior security positions at People's United Bank and SunTrust, served in the Air Force for 23 years. He is also chair of the board for the National Technology Security Coalition. Second, Suzanne Hall. Suzanne is the global CISO and head of infrastructure for Alimentation Couche-Tard Companies, which is commonly called Circle K, which operates about 15,000 stores globally. Prior to Circle K, Suzanne was managing director at PwC for their security practice and risk practice, and also held CISO roles at AARP, the American Red Cross, and other organizations. Third, Helen Patton. Helen is the CISO at the Ohio State University. Prior to working at Ohio State, she spent 9 years at a Fortune 50 financial services firm in senior risk and resiliency management positions. She's a member of the state of Ohio's Attorney General's Security Advisory Board, Women for Economic and Leadership Development, and the CISO Executive Roundtable. And last but not least, Mike Witt. Mike is the EVP and CISO for Iberia Bank, a regional bank with over 30 billion in assets. Prior to Iberia, Mike was Chief Information Security Officer for BBA Compass Bank for their US operations, where his responsibilities not only included security, but also IT risk and fraud. Mike's on the National Leadership Board of the CISO Coalition as well. We've got this great board panel here for us. So let me just start it off, and we'll start alphabetically for the moment. We'll start with the last name's Tim, but I'd like to get a view from all of you about how important is it or is it not to manage user risk, right? Many people I've seen in the industry view this as a checkbox item to fulfill audit or compliance requirements. Is that all that we need, or do we need more?
Well, Chris, thank you. I think it's one of those areas that we have to pay more attention to. You know, I live with a philosophy that when you're faced with anything, you got kind of 3 choices. You control it, you influence it, or you accept it. And, you know, obviously things that we can control, we need to do our very best to control. Things that we can't, we influence. And at some point, maybe you have to accept. I think for far too long, we've kind of accepted user behavior as a practice we couldn't do much about. And we put the, you know, systems in to try to, you know, mitigate that risk. But, you know, as you pointed out, it's, you know, it's frequently said that, you know, the user, the human, is the weakest link. I think we can turn that on its head and become the strongest advocate. And we've done quite a few things at Aflac in building a community of, you know, kind of grassroots cybersecurity ambassadors and trying to make that influence. So, you know, I do think we have to pay attention to it, because the levers that we have to pull are getting small. We can't control what the criminals do. You know, unfortunately, I think through bodies like the NTSC, and Helen is also on the board of NTSC. I think we're trying to influence that, through cyber legislation and other measures in the public domain, but we can't control that. So I think user behavior is one of those things we have to bring into our sphere of control.
Suzanne, what's your sense of this? Do we need to go beyond checkbox?
Oh, Chris, I absolutely do think we need to go beyond checkbox. I mean, so at Circle K, I've got 180,000 fabulous employees across the globe with a high degree of turnover in many of those areas. But the good news is that at the same time that all of the, that the endpoint user could be a risk, this user group, this user base is also becoming more tech savvy. And the more and more that we can provide training that's engaging and meets them at the point where they are, is really where we'll have the highest degree of impact. We've gamified training for our store employees in terms of how do you deal with customers in the store, how do you manage, multiple things going on. And now we're looking at, how do we make security training a little bit more engaging, a little bit more fun. The concept of rewarding good behavior has been, I think many of us have probably implemented that for many years, but, we continuously do that with small trinket type goals, which, really do motivate a lot of people, believe it or not. And we've actually been able to measure success, at least to a certain degree, over the course of the 2 years that I've been with Circle K in terms of how much more aware is the user base. We do this through a couple of surveys, but, we also do some testing, obviously, phishing campaigns and some other things. And we have seen a directional change in the organization in terms of how they're thinking about security, and being a little bit more proactive and how often they're calling, if you will, or submitting a case around something that's questionable. It's been great to see that change. And I think the common theme there is that it can change. I think to assume that your user base is always going to be your risk base, and that you can't educate them or you can't give them some tools to make them a little bit more savvy, is flawed thinking. And as I say, as my employee base gets younger and younger, particularly in the stores, we're seeing them being much more tech savvy, although also, balance that with they're a little bit more open in apps and other things that they're willing to do, but they are definitely open to the information.
Helen, what's your thought on this? And also, maybe you can talk a little bit more about gaining mind share, because I think you've done some pretty interesting things at the Ohio State University around that.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. As always happens with panels, I agree with everything that's been said before. At Ohio State, we've taken the approach, which is very aligned to the research from Florian and his research team, of trying to get and understand what people care about, and to be able to provide training and awareness for the things that they care about personally. I think I may be a little cynical, but when you're an employee of a company, you don't care about the data of the company as much as you care about your own stuff, as much as you care about your own family and your own environment. And so we've tried to marry the two things together, the personal concern and the need for the professional concern. And some of that aligns to the regulatory environments that we sit in, but some of that is just more generally trying to get people to change their underlying behavior. So this difference between, well, I have to really think hard to do this security thing, and therefore I don't want to think hard about it. I'm already faced with too many choices. Don't make me make another choice, and don't certainly make me make a security choice. We're trying to close those gaps. So we have implemented a program at the university which we home grew, which is a platform where people can go to do and learn about security things that they care about. So they can choose what topics they learn about, and we've aligned those topics to things that are personal to them. So we have topics that they're only 5 to 6 minutes long. This isn't talking about death by PowerPoint, but things like, how do you protect your data on Facebook? How do you protect your kids from cyberbullying? How do you decide how to protect yourself and your personal data, now that you're working from home, what does it mean to be able to do security while you're filing your taxes? Those kinds of questions are the kinds of questions we've put on this platform, with a thought that if we can encourage people to be secure in the things that they care about at home, they're going to bring those same behaviors to work with them. And this is what we're finding, that we've had folks that have said, wow, I know you only said it would take 5 minutes to do this training, but it actually took me 15 minutes because while I was going through the training, I was changing my privacy settings on my Google Mail or whatever it was. And so, yeah, end users aren't the weakest link. I think processes are the weakest link, but it's the users who are going to decide how to change the processes to make them more secure. And so trying to find ways to help them think about that and organically include those process changes is where we're at.
So Mike, so you've been a CISO in the banking world for some time, and you know, so much of the budget seems to be driven, the spending and investment in security seems to be driven based on regulations, right, and compliance. Is this an area where, you know, you feel you can just stop, you know, get the security awareness done, get the checkbox, and I suspect not, having had some conversations with you, what value is it to the organization to move forward? Why is it imperative to move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and no, it is not enough to check the box. You know, we talk about a good bit, and it's a soapbox item for me that, you know, in the banking world and probably other heavily regulated areas, right? But for sure in the banking world, you know, you got to be compliant. You got to check those boxes. But at the end of the day, when you've checked all the boxes, you haven't always done very much to actually secure your organization, protect your brand, protect the data, protect your clients, right? But you've checked a lot of boxes. And so it's not enough. And I love what Helen was talking about, because that's really what we have done. We have taken the step of saying, we don't want to talk about awareness and education for the 8 hours you're at work, right? Or 9 or 10 hours or whatever it is, because that's not exactly what Helen said. That's not really what they're worried about. And so we have completely sort of revamped our awareness program around how do you protect yourself and your family, your children? What does it look like to protect yourself in an online environment 24/7? And to wrap that around your entire family, hoping that, and I think we're seeing the same thing Helen was talking about, hoping that then they look at it as more of a 24/7 thing, and those 8 hours they're at work correlates, right? And so, for instance, a couple of things that we've done that we've tried to do outside of the box is twice a year, we have a day where we pay Iron Mountain to come on site to 8 or 10 of our locations, and we advertise to our associates, you know, bring all the paper you want to have shredded, but bring everything else, right? Bring your electronics, bring old laptops and old iPhones and, you know, old printers and whatever you have. And we spend a little bit of time talking to them about why it's important to properly dispose of those things because of what is still on them, right? The legacy data that's still residing on those things, even though you think it's not there anymore. And so we do things like that. And you know, that's all their personal stuff. I mean, there's no corporate assets that are going through that process. That's all personal stuff that we're collecting on their behalf. And then we do a little bit too. We try to stay away from the death by PowerPoint and all that kind of training. One of the things that we've done, exactly what Helen was talking about, is, you know, I don't know that putting my mug on a video is all that helpful all the time, but I spend a good bit of time doing just kind of like a fireside chat type of thing, right? And we talk about one topic in 5 or 6 minutes, Facebook or Twitter or the election, or, you know, how do we protect ourselves? And we never mention the office. We never mention, Iberia Bank, and how are you protecting Iberia Bank? It's really important to protect our brand. We stay away from that completely. We just talk about it from a personal perspective, and then we gamify a good bit as well. Suzanne's right. I mean, as cheesy as it can be sometimes to gamify those things, people love it. They like getting an umbrella or, you know, whatever they're going to get for doing things. And so that's really where we've been focused. Now, I will tell you, back full circle to your question, Chris, really quick. It's interesting we haven't gotten a lot of buy-in from the regulators, from the Fed. That's a great thing, right? They're still wanting to check the box, right? Are you sending fish emails to your employees and yes, we're doing those things. Are you doing the required training pieces? Yes, we're doing those things. And they like to check the box and walk on, unfortunately. But again, it's a education process for all of us, and that's where we really want to take it. Is we want to make it personal, and you know, hopefully we'll get the Fed there one day too.
So how do you all convince business executives? I'm hearing this a pretty consistent align around personally relevant drivers for people. How do you convince the business executives that investment in getting people to behave more securely at home is actually going to help the organization? Anyone?
Yeah, I can jump in. I've probably been quieter than normal for me. So I you know, one of the things, and again, I know this isn't necessarily a plug, but you know, we have used the covered security solution to do that. When we first started doing, you know, sharing that, you know, I asked the executive team to participate, and yeah, and they went through the surveys, the 18 questions, and you know, they kind of saw the value themselves of going through that exercise and the awareness, especially our general counsel. You know, when I first joined AFLAC, she had me kind of doing those fireside chats and going around and building kind of a sense of community. And I think that was very helpful. So showing them that and then showing them the score in aggregate was very helpful, you know, as more of our employees kind of signed on to it. And that's one of the things that we do. You know, I fund that for our employees, because as Helen was pointing out, and I think, you know, Suzanne, others, it brings it home when you can see this is for your personal, this is to protect your family. We are giving you this covered security solution to protect your family. And, you know, I have full expectation those practices will come back into the office because once people have that security mindset, I think it's pervasive. But it also shows our care for them, right? So, and then I can display that aggregate to our, you know, scorecarding to our executives and show that, you know, there is some effectiveness. One of the hardest things, and I think all of us on the panel would agree, one of the hardest things is how do you measure the effectiveness of the shred days? How do you measure the effectiveness of the awareness, the fireside chats, all of these things that we're doing? How do you really measure that? And the one thing I have found is Cover does give me a way to get indicators and trending in that direction. And so that I can talk to the board about it and I can talk to our executives about these are some things that we're doing that we're seeing some improvement in scores at the individual level. So
yeah. How do you measure risk around users? Ellen?
So I actually, go figure, I work for a research university, so folks around me are very interested in what the research says. So in terms of getting funding for these sorts of programs, using the research that Florian has referenced and others like it, there is already a body of work that talks about why do people take risks? Why do people accept risks? What will entice them to change their behavior and what won't? So I think if you add that data to the fact that people are really, really tired of the same old regulatory training that we've been sending them through for the last 20 years, it becomes a no-brainer to be able to say, boy, it's time to try something different. So I think on the how do you convince people, it's actually quite easy to convince people to go down this path, because what we did before didn't work, and it's time to try something new. I think in terms of evaluating the success of the programs, what we try and do is identify on 2 or 3 key behaviors that we want to change. And we do some baseline measurements so we can come up with some A/B testing. We measure the current state of the state around that behavior. That could be reporting on phishing events. I'm less concerned actually about people clicking on phish than I am reporting weird stuff, because my intent is to be able to identify and respond quickly, right? So who's reporting phish? How many people are choosing to use a password manager? How many people are choosing to use a multi-factor solution? Those kinds of things. So let's do some baselining on that. Let's train a portion of the population on those things. Let's make them aware. And let's compare their behavior to the people we don't train. And you can see, is the training working or is it not? So the benefit of awareness training over compliance-based training is, with compliance-based training, you've got to put everyone through the damn training. And this is where we are ticking off our end users because they hate that stuff. But to be able to say, we're making you're in a special class, we're going to be giving you different kinds of awareness training, and it's special and it's important. People are more likely to take that training. And now I've got this A/B training research group that I can work off of. And it's been very successful. Now, some of the things we've done haven't been successful, but the fact that we've done the research and we can say this worked and this didn't is good, even if it didn't ultimately work out. So that's how we've done it.
Just to add here, Chris, you pointed out earlier that about 1% of awareness actually translates into action, right? Under certain circumstances. And I think that's something to also think about is, rather than just looking at the numbers, what are the uptake and adoption of certain practices or two-factor authentication, whatever. Talk to your users and understand, well, what's preventing them from doing that? And like, because there's a difference between understanding the importance of something and then actually being able to carry that out and closing that loop and understanding what actually impedes people from, setting more secure passwords is something that's helpful. And there are institutions now that start giving their employees licenses for password managers, because we tell them you need to have unique passwords, but no one can remember 120 different unique passwords that are also strong, right? Or I think we as an industry have made lots of errors as well. Like for many years, we had people change passwords in regular intervals until research showed, well, that actually just makes passwords weaker and more guessable, because people need to somehow remember that new password that you make them change every 6 weeks. So I think, talking to the users and kind of understanding how you can work with them and meet them where their problems are can be really effective to also increase your security posture.
Yeah, and Chris, if I want to go back to something you asked early on about, talking to the executive team and what's changed that might change how people are looking at end user and home use computing and other things. Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And COVID's really been, obviously it's a crisis we're all still living with, but because I run infrastructure, right, as soon as COVID hit, and we watched COVID come, if you will, from across Europe and into North America, and we went from an absolutely no remote worker model to all above store, 100% work at home model in multiple locations because of the European lockdowns and other things, and many lockdowns in Canada and the United States. I don't want to get into politics about that, but people were locked down. And then, so we were leveraging that. Now the home is the corporate computer base, right? So your behaviors at home are now your behaviors at work. And we really leverage that as we're launching some of our new tools and behaviors, and continue to leverage that now. But it really sells sort of you can't have comfort in your end users' behavior if you're not giving them coaching and tools that they can use and apply to their personal lives as well. And then the other piece, though, and then what Helen was talking about, measuring not just did you click on the phish, but we do measure much more important for me is how many people reported the phish. and we're trying to make that number go higher when we do our phishing campaigns, which I know phishing campaigns are, old school, but I do think that they're easy to do when it keeps it top of mind for folks. So we do continue to do phishing campaigns in addition to.
Interesting. So a number of you have talked about sort of different incentives, little gifts, tchotchkes, et cetera. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about your experience, and maybe Florian, you've got some research on this too, on negative incentives versus positive incentives. For a long time, our industry has been focused on the negative. You can't. If you do this, something, do something wrong, something will happen. I'm always amused that the punishment for not understanding how to behave with in security is more training. So we actually condition the users that training is punishment. But I'm curious as to any of your experiences around positive and negative incentives and how you see what sort of mix you should have.
So I'll start. In my experience, negative incentives don't work. Now, there's some regulatory concerns to that. I was talking to an individual today who was onboarding to a new company, and they had required security training on the first day of her joining the company, and she did not get it complete, so they cut off her access. So welcome to the company. You're working remotely, you don't take the training, they cut off your access. Well, it's so counterproductive, it's ridiculous, right? I think the challenge is how to create a positive incentive that is going to motivate people to change behavior, not just take more training, not just engage with the security team more, but actually change their behavior. And it has to be aligned to their personal incentives. So, if they're hired in a certain role and they've got an outcome, that might be numbers of sales, it could be number of customers supported, it could be number of computers re-imaged, it could be anything depending on their role. If you can align the incentives to that or things that they care about personally, then it can be helpful. But the proof in the pudding for me is whether or not their behavior actually changes.
Anyone else want to share negative versus positive rewards? I've seen some research from MIT, which from the Sloan School at MIT, that positive incentive is about 50% more effective in their research than negative incentives. But have you seen that in the flesh, or Florian, have you seen anything?
Yeah, I will tell you, and there's been a lot of reasons for it, but we've had to start kind of a phishing accountability program, and I'm not necessarily a fan of it, but I will say that has negative connotations and consequences that I think actually distract from the overall program, and we're actually, after doing it for some time, we're actually re-examining that, because I do think basic human behavior, responds much more positively to reward. And, I've always lived by the practice in leadership that when you see a behavior you want, reward that behavior and you'll see it repeated. And, it's the old management adage of, catch someone doing the right thing instead of the wrong thing. And so I do agree that that's much more effective.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tim, that, I'm sorry, Florian.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say really quick, it's interesting, Tim, that you say that, because we're sort of in the same situation. We've historically, when you fish your employees and then they fail, they're going to get that training immediately, and then we even had we had a process where if you failed 3 times within a given period, then you actually got a nice little phone call from an HR rep, right? And you are you're creating additional risk for the company. You're not learning this. You're a bad employee. You need to do better, right? And that really is not long-term effective. You're right. It creates noise, and it takes away from what we're really trying to do. And, one of the things that we've done now, granted, I work in an organization, well, it's grown since we're going through a merger now, but, for the last 5 years, it's 3,500 employees. So I can maybe do a couple of things that some of the folks on here can't, just from organization size, right? But one of the things that I've done, and we did it during our little, tech talks that I would do, is, hey, look, we're all on the same team here. Back to the point of, it's probably more important that they're reporting what they're seeing. And I would tell them, we have a fish reporting email box and all those things, right? We have security operations team you can send it to. But you know what? Send it to me. I'm the CISO of the bank, right? We're all on the same team here. And one of the things that we really drive home with our employees is that we're all security employees. You may be a teller, you may be an FSR, or you may be whatever business leader that you are, and I'm the CISO. Great. But we're all security employees. We all have responsibility to protect our brand and our bank and our clients and ourselves personally and all those things. And so as part of that, we're all on the same team. You see something you got a question about, send it to me, and I will respond to you. And again, I know I can do that because I'm at a little smaller organization. That's probably not practical at some of the organizations that are represented here. But it's interesting that you're on that journey, Tim, because we are as well. That negative, we caught you. Here's your training. Don't ever do it again. Don't make HR call you. All that does is really create more of an us versus them kind of mentality, and it's not really about us, right? About us protecting us. And so, yeah. Anyway, we're trying to get away from that as well.
Yes, I think you're. Mike, I think you're right. And I've been doing this role for Circle here just 2 years, but over the course of many years. And I do sometimes think the simple things work the best. I've got little trinkets that people win when they report spam, and most of the time it's a camera cover for your laptop, right? But it says Circle K and with a little secure logo on it. So every time they're in front of their laptop now, they're seeing security in front of them, right? And it really helps to keep it reminded. I do, little things, mouse pad, lanyards, things like that. Of course, I can also give away a Polar Pop, so that's kind of easy as well. Or Tim, you can give away the secure duck. I still have my secure duck, Tim. But so it doesn't have to be expensive, but it is little things. Really, people love to win little things. This year during our Secure Awareness Month, we did have a grand prize for like the best story, in terms of what they learned from security over the course of the month. We gave away a tablet, but that was one, right? But you'd be surprised at how the idea that somebody was going to win that tablet. We got more feedback, more great suggestions, and more engagement from just that one activity. And it's in terms of reward, I mean, it's not easy for me to necessarily put a dollar amount around that, but it sure seemed effective.
So on our platform, we've also given away security things. So yeah, absolutely, the webcam covers those kinds of things, but we've also partnered with some vendors who have provided a year's subscription to their particular kind of software. So whether that's, a home subscription for antivirus or a password manager or whatever, and that becomes one of the prizes. We've also, through COVID, one of the prizes is that we make a donation to someone's charity on their behalf. So for those people who don't want another tchotchke, and frankly, when we rolled the platform out, we wanted to have all this branded stuff because then people would walk around campus, they'd see the branded stuff and they'd go, where did you get that from? And people would say, well, we took an hour's worth of work on the cybersecurity platform. Well, no one's walking around campus. Well, fewer of us are walking around campus right now, right? So switching over to digital rewards has been part of the COVID experience for us on this side. And this is where, for us, the donate to a food pantry or donate to a medical research or donate to this or that has been part of our thinking in that space too.
Great. Florian, we'll give you the last word on rewards.
Actually, I want to go a little bit beyond rewards, right? So I think we're all in agreement that positive rewards are probably the more useful approach. I think in addition to that, it's also making it easier for people to do the right thing and make them realize when they're doing the wrong thing. And awareness can be helpful in getting them to realize they're doing the wrong thing, but make them do the right thing, make that easy, that takes work, but that can be really powerful. So we've been done a lot of work on nudging. How do you get people actually to review their privacy settings and go in and make changes, right? And if you just show them a message and say like, hey, your location has been accessed 5,000 times by all these apps, right? That motivates people to look what's going on. And I think one of the big challenges in security is that threats are often quite invisible. And then we're supposed to do all of our jobs and watch our children and do all these things at the same time, right? But then also make sure we really carefully check the URL that has some Unicode characters in there to make sure we're not falling for phishing attacks. Whereas requiring two-factor authentication is probably the much more important default setting you can go towards, rather than trying to train all your users to always spot all phishing attacks, right? That's just not feasible. So I think also thinking like, well, how can we, when we notice that it's actually difficult for people to do a certain behavior, how can we make it easier for them to be more secure in what they're doing rather than necessarily changing them as well?
Fantastic. So I would love for us to stay for another hour plus to talk, because there's so much to talk and there's so much knowledge and experience you all have. But we are nearing the end. So what I'd like to do is very quickly show some examples of how you can do things like the nudging that Florian's talking about, how you can create some of that prioritization to help them understand, to cut through all of the information as to what's really important for them. And I'm going to do that very quickly. We really have focused this on the ideas and the concepts and not as much on covered itself, the product. But I'd like to show you a little bit of that and then come back for a final comment from the panelists of the most important thing that they really would want to share if they could, about how to effectively address user behavior. So let me just quickly show you a couple of ways. So as Florian was talking about nudging, he talked about leveraging, and I would call it leveraging context, right? What's important to people. One way to do that we have found effective is by, if I can get here, is by following people and reminding them when their vendors that they use might have been breached, and then use that to drive them towards behavior that is good for them and good for the organization. As an example, just being able to go around as they're doing their daily work, if they browse to a website, pop up a notice to let them know, hey, there was a breach here. This is where you'll get 20, 30% of your people trying to figure out what they should do because they don't want to fall prey to credit card fraud or account takeover, as you can see here with Instacart. Looking to explore this a bit, you give them a reward, an emotional reward, a kudo, a point. Points, badges work just as well as tchotchkes, and financial rewards don't have to be high, is what we found. But really highlight for people what are the most important things for them to do. And this is a particular situation where passwords have been compromised at Instacart. One of the activities that they could do is use a password manager, which is one of those 18 behaviors, and that's something that Florian has identified as well. They can continue to explore that. They'll get another kudo, and they can even learn about the individual password managers, go and install them. So if we create this sort of breadcrumb approach to prompt them based on their relevant experience, their personal experience, you can get very strong response. As well, gamifying, as we've talked about, but then identifying the most important things for them to do. The reality is some people are very strong around phishing, some are very strong around password management. And if we treat them all the same, they'll ignore if they think they're strong or are strong in that area. they'll ignore the education. So it's key not only to gamify, show people where they compare to others. Competition is a great driver of behavior, but also let them know how they can increase their scores if they do the most important things relative to their behavior. Now, and of course, giving people rewards, letting them know, even connecting up to their security awareness system to reward them for taking actions around the phishing system or the security awareness system, et cetera, completing games in the security awareness system. If you do this, you can start gathering metrics, and then you can start actually measuring the behavior. So on the back end, you can start seeing, how do we rate across our people? How do we rate across the risks of phishing and credential stuffing and password cracking? Why are we getting a C in password cracking? We can start seeing the percentage of people who reuse passwords on a majority or all of their accounts. How can you benchmark against other companies or within the organization? One thing that I've heard often from CISOs is, it's great to present this to departments to get their buy-in to improve. If the marketing department is worse around password management than all others, you'll get the CMO working with you because they don't want to be highlighted as having poor security. So those are just some very quick things that you can accomplish if you put in place this sort of framework that Florian has described and that the CISOs on this call have described. So as we're trying not for this to be a super commercial for cover, we're going to come back to the CISOs for their final commentary and sharing. So let me come back to the CISOs and ask and also Florian, for your final thoughts, what are the most important thing that you think there is for other security professionals to keep in mind around user behavior? We'll go backwards this time. Mike, we'll start with you.
Okay. I think it's a lot of what we talked about. I think that it is all about continuous positive reinforcement around how folks can protect themselves personally and their families, their kids, their parents, their, whatever that is. I believe that if we continually focus, Helen said it best, I think if we continually focus on what they care about all the time, 24/7, then we can and positively promote those things, then I think we can change behavior. I think it's very hard to do when you just focus on the 8 hours that they're sitting in front of their computer at work.
Helen?
Yeah, I wish I had a really great answer for you. I don't. I'm going to go a little off tangent. I think, especially right now, people are really fatigued by all the information that they're getting thrown at them. And so we do have to remain creative with the way that we try and help people become more secure. And I do think we have to think about positioning the information in such a way that, one, they want to adopt the secure practices, and two, that we give them evidence to think that interesting people are making these changes. So sort of a focus on who are the influencers of our communities and making sure that those folks are engaged as well, I think will go a long way towards being able to get the entire community to move in the direction that we need.
Great. Sorry, Florian, I skipped over you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I think Tim talked earlier, or it was Mike or Tim, I'm not quite sure, talked earlier about how it's not us versus them, but it's about protecting us, right? And making sure everyone sees themselves as part of us. And I think really going and listening to the people who are supposed to implement these security practices you're prescribing can be really illuminating. One of the reasons why I really enjoy doing qualitative research where we go and interview people is you get your mental models of how security works and should work and how people should think about this kind of thrown out the door every time, right? Because people just have a very different understanding of it. And I think getting that perspective is extremely helpful to then understand how you actually meet their needs better in a way, and also maybe adjust your processes in a way that better serves the organization's needs.
Great. And I'll leave Tim, the final word to you.
Yeah, so I think I lost you there for a few minutes, but the one of the things that I think, you know, I certainly agree with what Helen and Mike had said, Florian. You know, I try to endeavor to make security fun. I mean, it's fun for me. Why can't it be fun for others? And so we do a lot of gaming kinds of things and fun contests and things like that. I have a very good awareness team, again, working with our cybersecurity ambassadors who's embedded throughout the organizations. But, you know, trying to make it fun and memorable. And I think that's the key.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. And thanks, Suzanne, who unfortunately had to drop off. We were trying to do this in 45 minutes, but we had such a good conversation. I'll let it extend. But thank you all. Thank you, participants. Feel free to send questions after the fact. We can always try to get out to the panelists and get their thoughts on them. And you can send that to info@coveredsecurity.com. And thank you all, Florian, Helen, Mike, and Tim. Thank you so much for spending your time. And sorry we slipped